Hola mi gente, welcome back to another episode of Tuesday Tea with me. So this week I am recording alone. I'm finally finishing, I'm actually doing my birth story, not finishing. This is kind of like a part 2 to my telling my mom that I'm pregnant. I was a teen mom. I'm gonna link everything below, and in this video of the first part of where I found out I was pregnant when I was a teenager, and then telling my mom I was pregnant, and that whole story. So this is kind of like a continuation, which I've been trying to get done, and then every time I went to record this episode, we kind of there's been our podcast, the 1 year anniversary, and then we had Valentine's Day and just like a couple things in between. So I'm finally recording my birth story today, and this will be out. So it's like a continuation / part 2 of that story. So I'm really excited to get this done because I had a lot of questions as far as like the dad, where was the dad, or where is the dad, and stuff like that. So, and then I also didn't even talk about like my relationship after telling my mother I was pregnant and stuff, like our relationship and how that went. Because like I said, I think that was already kind of like a pretty long episode, and there was so much to discuss in that I really didn't get to talk too much about, what happened after. But that's what's great about this, the podcast and the channel. I can share so much with you guys. And so I left off with, telling my mom and how things went, and, how when I first told her I didn't stay with her for a little bit. I did want to point out that when I found out I was pregnant and, through all that, obviously I did tell the dad. Him and I were, boyfriend and girlfriend. We were like high school sweethearts at that time. So I did tell him. He was, obviously one of the first people that I told, even before telling my mom. And his reaction was very much like, I'm here to support you in whatever you decide. He never once tried to steer me in one direction or the other. It wasn't like, there was no convincing on his part, which was nice because he was strongly just like, whatever it is you decide to do, I'm here, and I 110% support you. So that was nice. That was, some support that I had unconditionally, and that was just what I needed at that time. So that was really nice. And, obviously I told him my plan was to keep it and stuff like that. And, he was just on board with whatever it was that I decided, and very much a present father, from that moment on. And that's why I say, my oldest son, he's such a great young man, and I know, probably most parents feel that about their children. However, he really is, no one's perfect, but just, I look at him throughout the stages and the ages that he's been through, and, I tend to compare it to myself at that age, and I'm just blown away because I feel like where he's been at his ages took me years into my 30s to get there, just such a great young man, very good kid, respectful, and then, went to college, graduated from college. He did do a 2-year community college to start out with, and then he transferred to a local university and graduated from there. Myself and his dad were both very, very present in his life. His dad was there from day one, and, we had a great co-parenting relationship. It did not start out that way. I'm not going to sit here and lie. It did not, there was a rough start, once we first separated when he was about a year old, but, that was just the very beginning, and we were still kids ourselves. And, that didn't last long before we really knew we had to put our child's needs ahead of our own and really make sure that he was brought up the best way possible. Make sure that he was brought up in a way that neither his father or myself really had that type of upbringing. We knew we wanted so much more for our son, and we both loved him so much. I mean, we loved him unconditionally. We just wanted the best for him. So I think once we realized that, which thank God was very early on, we kind of like changed gears towards like, okay, let's just do what's best for our child. And that was what we did. You know, we really did come together and just, you know, create this beautiful being. So he was very supportive and very much present in our son's lives. Mind you, we were both still in high school at the time as well. So that's just something, you know, to keep in mind. And remember, we were both still kids ourselves when we had our son. He came to like a few doctor's appointments, but like I said, we were in school, so he wasn't really present for much of the doctor visits. When I had my son, which I'll get into the birth story, he was there for the birth of his son. And then my son was born in April. I winded up moving back out of my mother's house in May of 97. Ironically enough, I think right on Mother's Day was when Isaiah and I left there. My maternal grandmother lived very close to my mother, and she winded up letting me stay with her until I finished the school year out, because I was still in school and it was May, so I still had another like month and a half of school left. So she had me finish school, and then once I was done with school in June of that year, she then said, you know, I can move where I wanted or do as I pleased at that time. And I winded up moving in with my son's father. My maternal grandmother, whom I never really had a super close relationship with. I mean, luckily that was one thing she did do for me, and I was very grateful for. She made sure, she said, you know, I want you to come stay with me and live with me until you finish this year of school, and then you can, you know, do as you please, which I think was very big of her, and I thank her for that. She's no longer here with us. May she rest in peace. She passed away in July of 2016. So she just passed away. Well, now it's 7 years. Will be 7 years, but it's crazy to think about because it doesn't even feel that long ago. But yeah, so I did that. You know, I stayed with her. So all right, let me, I guess, backtrack a little bit now. And kind of just try to start kind of where I left off. I don't really know where I even left off with my telling my mom I'm pregnant episode. But so I winded up going back with my mom shortly after, maybe like 2 weeks or so. Wasn't too long. I went back. I got situated with, you know, finding an OB, you know, just getting my OB visits in and starting to really get proper prenatal care and taking care of what I had to at that moment. And I did go back to school. So I was, and my relationship with my mom once I went back home, it was different a little bit, but I'd say she was very supportive. Other than, I guess it was times where she felt maybe that disappointment in herself or you know, what have you, she would kind of like say certain remarks. Like I think I pointed this out in my last episode where I said she would, you know, when I was just like picking out outfits, she would point out like, oh, I couldn't wear what any of my friends were wearing, or my son was born in April and I turned 16 in March, so I turned 16 a month before I had him, and all my friends were having, you know, sweet 16s or had bat mitzvahs or bar mitzvahs, and I didn't have that because my mom had to throw a baby shower for me instead of a sweet 16. And I remember she would say, you know, things like, well, you know, you don't even get a sweet 16, you're having a baby shower instead. And so little things like that definitely really stung and they stuck with me. But, you know, I don't think she meant it from like a bad place. It was just ways of her, you know, it was things that were really bothering her that she let out. You know, I was like the one just mirroring that pain inside of her that reflected back. But I do want to say that she was supportive, you know, pretty much the rest of the time. I always had my doctor visits on like a certain day, and she made sure she would take off of work that day to her and my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. One of them would either, usually take me to my doctor's appointments that day. One thing I do want to point out, and I'm not saying this to like knock anyone that needs help or anything like that. I think people that abuse the system is definitely, that's a whole nother topic. But when you really do need help, I wholeheartedly believe in it for certain people. However, I will forever be thankful that my mother always told me, you're not going to get an easy ride or free ride or help, or it's not going to be easy. Like, you wanted this, now you're going to figure out how to work to support yourself and a child. And I remember at that time, I was like, wow, she's so cruel. Like, I was so mad at her. And, granted, years later, I had to work 3 jobs. I had to work in a nightlife industry to be able to support myself and my child and, keep a roof over our head. But not only that, but live a good life, like a decent life. I will forever be grateful for that, because it taught me how to hustle, straight up hustle. The sad part is that I luckily I did tell her, before she had passed away, my mom, like, I was able to express my gratitude towards her for that. But, but I just felt like I wish I could have said and did more at the time, not realizing that I was going to lose her so early in my life. So I stayed with her, and then I was 37 weeks pregnant. So my oldest son, he did last until 3 weeks before my due date, and which is funny because I was told remember, I just went to like a Planned Parenthood in the beginning just to confirm it, and I didn't know where to go or what to do, and they gave me a due date of April 9th, and then when I started with my OB/GYN to start the regular routine prenatal visits, they changed my due date to April 29th because they said he was like on the smaller side. So they changed it, but I winded up actually having my son April 8th. So if I went by like that first date, I was only a day early, but if I went by the second date, I was kind of like a little under 3 weeks early, which they say 37 weeks either way, you're full term. And my son was 6 pounds, 6 ounces, 19 and a half inches long. So he was a really good size. I mean, I was super tiny to begin with. I was 16 years old. I was petite. I've been petite my whole life. I'm tall, but, I've been pretty like skinny. And with him, I gained 50 pounds during my pregnancy. I gained the most weight with him, my first. But yeah, so I was actually, so funny to like look back and think on, but I was always so nervous about like false labor, like going in for like false labor. I did have a friend of mine who was pregnant at the same time as me. Actually, I had 2 friends who were pregnant at the same time as me. And they both went in early. One had her baby at like 7 months, and then the other one had her baby at like 6 months. So I remember we were really now one was only like a year older than me, so one was 17, and then the other one was the same age as me. So my mother and I started to become really nervous, thinking that I would go in early too. We thought maybe just because we were young, our age, our bodies just kind of went into like an earlier labor. So we were kind of nervous about that. We were kind of like preparing like really ahead of time because of that. I was 37 weeks, I think 37 weeks in like a day, or maybe like to the day, 37 weeks. And I don't know why I was just so afraid. I think like from all the books I was reading and things I was reading at the time, I always felt like, please just don't let me say, oh my gosh, I'm in labor, and because of pain, and you go there and then, they're like, oh no, you're not in labor, it's just false labor. So I remember constantly asking people, especially my mom, like, what does it feel like? How do I know? I don't know why I had this obsession. Mind you, I was 16 years old, but I had this obsession with like, how will I know? So I remember I always would hope that like my water would just break. And that did happen with one of my friends that went in early. But I would just always hope that let my water break just so I know it's clear as day you're in labor, because I don't know why I just had this fear of not knowing that I was in labor. I just, so I'm like, and talking to people, talking to my mom and talking to like anyone else, my aunts or anyone that was older than me that had children, everyone would say that, oh, you'll know. Like, it's the most excruciating pain ever. You're going to know. So I'm like, all right, I mean, it's got to be like the most painful thing I've ever experienced, And I remember the first time I asked my mom, what does it feel like? And she goes, well, try squeezing a watermelon out of a lemon. I was like, didn't really get it, but I knew that had to like be pretty painful. So that's all that would play in my mind. Like, that one just like stuck with me. It was a Tuesday. I know, like, when the days my kids were born, the hour, the minute, like everything, I'm sure most parents do. I don't know. But I remember it was a Tuesday. I had a scheduled doctor's appointment. And my mom was taking me that day, thank goodness, because we're in the car and we're driving, we always like had our little talks on the way and stuff like that. And she's like, oh, so how are you feeling today? And I was like, I'm having pain. Like, it wasn't anything bad. And I was like, I'm having pain. Kind of feels like it comes and goes. I was like, but it's nothing like too bad. So she was like, I think once I said like comes and goes, it kind of set off an alarm in her head. And she was like, what do you mean it comes and goes? And I was like, well, I don't know. I'm like, but it's not like really bad. And she's like, well, when did you have it last? So I told her like the last time. And then as we're driving there, she's like, I need you to tell me if you have it again. So I told her, and then, so we get to the doctor, and it was kind of like just a routine visit at this point. I think at that time I might have been going every week or every other week, because I was already at the end, but I was considered high risk because of my age. So they, I was going, I don't remember. I think it might have been every 2, I don't know. I think I was just about to start my every week appointments. And then this was like the first of the every week. And then they realized I was in labor. So we get there, and the doctor, my mom was always in there with me for my appointments and stuff like that. And the doctor was like, so how are you feeling? Is everything good? So I was like, yeah, I'm feeling fine. And my mom's like, no. She's like, she's actually having pain. Like, so my mom described what I had told her. And they weren't going to do an internal exam that day. They weren't even going to do one. But once my mom mentioned what I was feeling, and like I really didn't even want to say it, because like I said, it was tolerable. It was like uncomfortable, but nothing painful. So she tells the doctor, and the doctor's like, oh, let's do an internal. Then we need to make sure that, everything's okay. So they do an internal exam, and they realize that I'm already about, I think, 4 centimeters dilated. So I was in labor. So like, oh, she's in labor. So they, take me on over to labor and delivery. And the crazy thing is that my son's father was in school. So they're calling the school, and, my friends winded up starting to know because they called him on the loudspeaker. So they called him down to the office, and then he got there shortly after. I got there that morning. I was in labor with my oldest son for 13 and a half hours. I got there, I think at like 8 a.m. No, it was 12 and a half hours. 12 and a half, I'm sorry. It's been that long. So I got there at 8 in the morning, and then I had him at 8:36 p.m. that night. So I remember, I don't know why, because I feel like this was more of like a newer thing. Not saying it's like a trend or anything like that, but I think just more research has been done, or people have been looking into it more as far as like epidurals and stuff. How like in the more recent years, people have wanted to go more natural, and back when I had my son, a lot of women were getting epidurals and all that stuff. It was kind of like the way, you know. I feel like it still kind of is. But I didn't want one. I didn't want an epidural. I wanted to go all natural. I wanted to, you know, I didn't want an epidural. I had made that very clear. So when the nurses and everyone had come in and they were getting me prepped for, you know, just labor and delivery, they had told me, you know, are you getting an epidural? And I said, no, I do not want one. I want to go natural. And one of the nurses was like, well, you know, honey, just keep in mind that past a certain point, you won't be able to get one. So just, you know, keep that in mind and, you know, good luck pretty much. So yeah, I lasted till I think about 6 centimeters because I was already almost 4 when I went in. I lasted till 6 and it took me a while to get to 6 centimeters dilated. And I remember the pain. I have pictures of like when I was having, mind you, we didn't have, you know, digital cameras and stuff back then. It was all with like the disposable cameras. You had to go and develop your photos. So you didn't even see them right away or anytime soon for that matter. But every time I would have a contraction, you could see me like holding the sides of my hospital bed and just like, you know, like just trying to bear it. And oh, it was crazy. I remember when people would ask me after what was the pain like, there was a window, you know, in my hospital room. And I remember during one contraction, and this was where I like gave up and I wanted the epidural. I was looking out at the window and I was like, oh my God, I just want to throw myself out the window. Like that's how bad the pain got for me. So I finally tell my mom. My mom was very, you know, honestly, I thank God because it was, you know, the one and only pregnancy and labor that I had my mom there for. So that's why I always say, you know, God makes no mistakes. It was that one pregnancy and birth and grandchild, you know, because he grew up with my mother until he was 9 years old, that my mom was able to be present for. You know, we didn't know that we would lose her so early. And the fact that I got to experience that with her, even though we didn't get off to a great start with the pregnancy, if it wasn't for her being right there next to me, holding my hand, and, you know, when I told her I need the epidural, she went like running into the hall and trying to like get the nurses. And one of the nurses had told her, you know, all of a sudden there was only one anesthesiologist on the floor at that time. And she told my mom, she's like, all of a sudden everyone wants an epidural, you know, so we're hoping we can get to her. And I remember just like crying and screaming in pain. And, you know, she was crying and like shaking, like it hurt her so bad to see me in that kind of pain. And, you know, she would run to the hallway and she's like, please, like help, like get my daughter an epidural. And like, you know, she was really just like fighting for me and just my comfort and support, because my son's father at the time, like he was a kid. So he was just as scared as I was and didn't know what the hell to do. So he was just there, but you could clearly see like he was very afraid too. So I winded up getting the epidural. So I did have the epidural, and we finally started pushing around. Oh my God, you know, because epidurals, they tend to slow your labor down. So, you know, it definitely makes the whole labor process and pushing even longer because it slows it down a bit. And then because you don't feel, and mind you, I had labor with an epidural and I've had one without. So I do know the difference. It's intense. It's really, really intense. It's really like such an outer body experience because it is so painful and intense. It's crazy. It's just, but then you feel so proud of like what your body can do and handle. Like it's just, I swear, being a woman is just the best thing. You know, it's hard. It's really hard being a woman, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. So I got the epidural. It slowed things down. I don't remember like what time that was, but I do remember, you know, it was once I got to 6 centimeters, which was like a couple hours later. And then I remember at 7:30, we were finally going to start pushing, and it took a little over an hour for me to be able to push him out. And at 8:36 p.m. on April 8th, my son was born. And it was a beautiful experience. I had my mother there. I had his dad there. We were just so overjoyed and happy. You just finally realize that, okay, it's not going to be the easiest journey, but it's going to be one of the best journeys. And, it was such a blessing. We all realized it in that moment. And, I did go back home with my mom once I left the hospital, and I stayed there. So I went to school. I remember the high school that I was in, they wanted me to leave. I think like I think I was just about to like leave the school soon for my like leave home, and I was going to be homeschooled until I had the baby. And once I had the baby, I would continue being home. They actually wanted me to just stay home after I had the baby and be homeschooled until the end of the school year. It was something that I didn't want. I wanted to be very much present in school. I wanted to stay there. So I was in school up until the day I went into labor, and the only reason I wasn't there that day was because I had that doctor's appointment. So I was out that day for the appointment, and then once I had him, I did the homeschooling. I had one of my teachers who I saw had recently passed away, and it hit me hard because Mr. Shaw was his name. He was my home tutoring teacher for when I had my son, right after my birth, and he always had a special place in my heart for that. I only stayed home for like 4 weeks, and then I winded up going back because, like I said, I winded up going to my grandmother's for on Mother's Day. I went to my grandmother's, and then I stayed there till that school year finished. So I did go back home with my mom. I lasted for a month there. And, it wasn't working out in that sense, which there's going to be another continuation to this story where I'm going to go into what happened, why I left when Isaiah was barely a month old, how it got to that point, and then what our relationship winds up being from that point on. And I think that's why the last episode was really difficult for me. Not the last one, but my telling my mom I was pregnant as a teen mom, because my mom was such a great person, such a wonderful woman, a heart of gold. So I didn't really want to paint her in that bad light, and make her seem like this mean, woman. But I also knew that I had to be real, raw, open, honest, and share what happened. And I'm hoping that throughout this journey of me going through what I went through, and what my mother went through, and why she was the way she was, not making excuses. I'm going to share everything openly, how it brought me to where I am as far as breaking generational curses and just breaking out of things that I knew were not healthy as a parent, and things that I wanted to change moving forward so that my kids could grow up in a healthier environment and, live a better life than I had growing up. So that's going to be in the next episode, the aftermath. But yeah, so I did know what I was having. I found out at about 4 months or so. I knew I was having a boy. So there weren't like gender reveals or anything like that back then. I actually did find out though before the doctor told me, because when I was waiting, I remember having my folder for when I wanted a boy, by the way. I wanted a boy. That was like what I wanted. It was funny because I wanted a boy and his dad wanted a girl. I think like usually it's the other way around, but like I had my heart dead set on like a little boy. From even before I was pregnant, I yearned for a baby boy. And so I remember looking through my chart and seeing gender male, and I was just like ecstatic over the moon. And when I went in, they told me, but I kind of had already peaked at that point at what his sex was. So I did know when I had him. I already knew it was a boy. I already had his name picked out. That was another thing. Like I already had a boy's name. I had no girls' names picked or anything like that. I really wanted a boy. There were actually, things were as good as they can be. There's actually another little situation that I'm going to go into in my next episode about mother's instinct. It's going to be like, there's going to be so many little episodes after this. So if you like this stuff, stay tuned, because it's, and I think also too, it'll bring a lot of awareness on a lot of topics and issues, ones that I dealt with my son, mind you, being a 16-year-old mom with a newborn baby, things that like I picked up on. So like motherly instinct is definitely a real thing. Like it really is. Doesn't matter how old you are, I will tell you that. Mother's, intuition or whatever you want to call it, but definitely a maternal instinct. And then, yeah, like, what happened and how we got from point A to point B and ended up leaving. But I will say this, I will say that things really did turn around to where we winded up having a really good relationship, and she winded up really having a great bond and relationship with Isaiah. They became super, super close by the time he was a year. So it's not like it lasted long, that like tension or that, just that like resentment between us. It didn't last long. We handled it and got through it pretty quickly. But it was there in the beginning. Unfortunately, we did have that to where it was there. So yeah, and, but like I said, his dad was always there, very present. When he was a senior, because at the time he was a senior in high school, so he had completed all his like credits and classes that he needed by his senior year. So in our school, when we had completed what we needed in our high school, by the time you were a senior, you were able to leave school at like noonish, like it was like 11 or something. And his dad had done that. So his dad had picked up a job at like a local, like a chicken place. It was like, it was called Pudgy's at the time. I don't even know I know over here that those don't exist anymore. I don't know if there are any anywhere, but he worked at one of those places, and he really did, take care of us as best as he could at that time. And then I started working at Carvel, an ice cream shop. That was my first job. I know in one of my like very early episodes, I talked about my first job. So we did what we could, and we managed. We lived with his parents at the time, and I stayed there until my son was almost a year old. And then that was when I finally left. So I'm going to go into all those stories and, how we managed to just make it, or barely make it, I should say, until he was a little bit older. I think till he was like 3 or 4 was when I really started to finally, get a good job, just figuring out hustles and really just creating this better life that I had really wanted and yearned for my son and I. So it wasn't an easy road, but I'm going to talk about it all on here, all on the channel, because that's what this channel is for. And I just wanted to point out again, use protection, and even protection doesn't save you. So you have to be very careful, unless you're really ready and willing to live with the repercussions of your actions, whether it's having sex, protected or unprotected. Just be aware of the things that could potentially happen, and, just make sure that you're in a place that you can handle it if that happens to you. Not only that, but not only pregnancy, but there's STDs. I think pregnancy, thank God, is, something that's, it's lifelong, but I think much easier to deal with than, God forbid, some kind of like STD or, so there's also those things that you have to think about that are really can happen just as easy as anything else. So just be careful, be very careful, think things through. Like I said in the last time I had, a teen pregnancy episode, make sure you have a good support system, because I think had I had someone that I trusted and able to talk to at that time, I would have maybe been able to share that I was interested in having sex or had sex, and maybe had someone that I can trust that would have helped me make the right decisions. But like I said, God makes no mistake, so everything happens for a reason. I couldn't be happier that I have my son here. We grew up together, and that makes me kind of sad for him, because I feel like it is unfair and it is, somewhat a disadvantage to him. But at the same time, I see who he is and who he's become, and a mom, that's all you can hope for, that your child can be independent, strong, kind, just a good person. And he's that and so much more. So I think his dad and I and my family, because, you know, it does take a village. It really does take a village. And with him, it took a village. And I had a village there with me. You know, my grandmother played a huge part in helping. My stepfather played a huge part. That was another person. I don't think I talked about this. But, you know, he was one of the only people that when I told him, he was, not that he was happy for me, but he was the only one that let out joy and said, I'm here for you. Anything you need, I'm here for you. And every Thursday, I remember from that point on, he would have me come with him and my sister for dinner. And, you know, that was like our thing. And he really was there for me. I'll get into that in the next episode, but it was, you know, him, my grandmother, on my son's father's side, his entire family, his parents, his sister, his brothers, you know, everyone helped. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that we had a good support system, you know, although it wasn't, you know, there were some people that I wish that were there from the very beginning, like my mom. She just needed some time, you know, and I look back also and remember how young my mother was when all this, you know, happened. So, you know, it wasn't easy. But yeah, so that is my birth story with Isaiah. And this will continue into, you know, what happened kind of right after I had him and all that good stuff. But this has been a pretty long episode, so I'm going to end this one. And I cannot wait for our next episode. I think for the next one, I'm actually doing a review on a product, something that I got, and it was a gift for Valentine's Day. So I can't wait to review that product on here and share it with you guys. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please leave some love. I ask that you subscribe, comment. Let's have some more engagement. The growth on the channels have been incredible. I get so excited every time I look, and we're getting closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. So don't forget, once I do get to 1,000, we are going to have a big giveaway. So if you could please be a little more interactive and just, you know, leave some comments, some love, some likes, some reviews. You can find the channel anywhere, you know, Tuesday Tea with V on anywhere. Patreon, remember, those are totally separate episodes on Patreon. I dig a little deeper, and then I also go over very explicit things that, you know, I just can't share on here. But yeah, any of the, you know, social media platforms or our podcasts, it's all Tuesday Tea with V, and you can find us anywhere. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in, and I will see you in, I'm hoping to drop some extra episodes and content before our next podcast episode. But our next podcast episode will be out in 2 weeks from today. Take care. Adios, mi gente.